We are lighting the candle, a world that works. Hi, I'm your host, Bill Correll, and with me today, I've got your co-host, Jan Jeremias. We are good buddies after 3 years of doing this together, and quite frankly, we're looking forward to what comes next because we've got a lot of good ideas for new content and new conversations. And I think probably just to get caught up in everything, I'm getting back from a 9 day cruise out of Manhattan down to the Bahamas. We went by way of Miami, and it was really great. We spent a lot of time, my wife and I, just spending with each other's company, eating way too much, not really drinking as much as I usually do on a cruise like that. Kind of didn't need to, but the point is that we had a ball and made a lot of friends. So I'm back here in the saddle, literally uh, leaning back in my recliner, looking at my beautiful friend Jan, and just saying, is there anything in particular that kind of comes to mind that you might want to chat about today? I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah,
However,
yeah. Do you have something?
well,
Or
I was thinking in terms of some of the conversations that have been going on this week. Um, that I haven't been a party to, but I've been observing. And it just brings me to a couple of things that we've talked about several times. And one of them has to do with critical thinking, which is more or less bringing a curious mind to any subject so that you're involved and engaged in a conversation to learn something as opposed to make a point and win an argument, if you will. And I'm just wondering what it will take for our culture and our society to get back into the mode where people don't debate as a daily routine. We used to share information with each other, and then it was fun to go and fact check people, if you heard something different than they heard. Not these days. There's no fact checking that gets done typically. And from what I was seeing, most of the things that were being talked about, and I'm being general about this because I don't want to specifically talk about any particular subject, but the notion of having a critical um, and logical thinking process in terms of processing information from our peers, from our social friends and that sort of thing. I don't move in the same circles that you do, although I entertained a really lovely woman from New Jersey today who she's a healer, and you will be meeting her. The rest of you folks will be as well, I'm sure, at some point or another. And she has the musical bowls,
mhm,
and she does, I mean, like the full range of things, and she's working on a PhD in metaphysical healing. So I don't even know what that means right at the moment. So I have something to go look up and study a little bit. But I'm very impressed, that somebody, her background is fantastic. She came from the investment community, was a financial planner down in New York City, working with large clients and all the rest of that sort of thing. And after 9/11, it kind of knocked her off, her rails, if you will. And so she's been doing whatever she's been doing and raising a beautiful daughter and being married to a wonderful man. And now she's decided she needs to get a PhD in metaphysical healing. And I think that's commendable.
mhm. I'm thinking about your idea of critical thinking or curiosity, this open mind. And I had a conversation earlier, two conversations actually. Um, well, if I think about it, it's really been this day. I shouldn't say two. It was like, but the first step, I think, is getting to truly know yourself and get curious about yourself, because that's it's a great place to practice or to actually get expert, let's say, if at actually looking at yourself in a situation, an idea of self-reflection and knowing and seeing your tendencies or your behaviors. Um, I think it's very hard for us to go into a situation with another person, and I look at myself as like I'm constantly learning about myself or re-encountering myself in different situations and getting to examine things in a different way about myself. And then I think it just makes the ability to look at conversations with other people very differently.
Let me see. I'm going to check in with you and tell you what I got out of that. Um, when I think in terms of the work that I do on myself, and it is something that I am actively pursuing a lot of the time when I remember to. Other times I get hit in the face with something that doesn't really make me feel all that great. And so my automatic response to that is going to be, what's up with me that I am having this reaction to that? So I like to take the responsibility over here as to how it got received, as opposed to what the intention was of the universe putting it in my face right now. So those are the opportunities, I think, where I start to learn more about myself. And I just remember conversations, when I was in my 40s and even in my early 50s, the whole notion of having the construct of the self being something that you're constantly building, as opposed to, there are people who say, I've always been the type of person, blah, 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 blah. And, if that happens, I will always and I will never, and all those kinds of things. I don't understand that. I really don't. So they're talking about taking, the pronoun self with a small s when you're referring to the collective who you are, which we usually mean our body, our mind, our soul, our whatever, right? So the parts that can get upgraded and can be put through some sort of training exercise, or actually be better than we were yesterday. And that's the important thing, is that if we're having a day, we might as well accomplish something with it. Well, they're saying now we take that and we turn it into a proper noun, which with a capital S, simply because it's on your mind. It is a creation. And those people who take responsibility for the authorship of their own life and how your life occurs for you, just the knowing that the occurrence of what's going on with you may not be even close to what's really happening according to what other people would report. So the ability to ask questions about that, and then the ability to start to learn some things about yourself where maybe there might be an opportunity for some work to get done, specific work. In some cases it might be a listening skill, it might be an understanding of a word. Like, for instance, what the heck does metaphysical healer mean? I was like, I got to do some study in that area. So I recognize that, and I think, my hat is off to somebody who's doing that kind of work on themselves, because that rigor in the training to go and find out. I mean, she's been doing this for 20 years, and now she says she wants to um, take it to another level in terms of her understanding of her craft, her ability to explain it to other people in language that they can understand. So I kind of get the idea that she's operating from the standpoint of, this will make her a better teacher, for her to go through this training exercise and go through the discipline of accomplishing these things where someone else is setting the standards, right? And I guess that's kind of what we get to do, all the years that we're in school. We either show up and we do the work and we get graded on it. We're either happy with it or we're not. In some cases, we're not real happy, but we're glad it's over. And with that in mind, I mean, the next thing to learn is that what opportunity was gained and what opportunity was lost. So the whole notion of learning more about yourself and bringing that into other conversations with other people that I heard you say, I think that what that does is that puts you into or puts me into a situation. I've got to internalize it. I can't speak for you, but it puts me into a position where I can probably have a higher quality conversation and come away with a lot more than if I already thought I knew that everything, that was going to get said and what it meant and all the rest of that sort of thing.
I mean, one of the things that comes up as I listen is that whole idea of listening. I coming from a place where I don't know if somewhat, we start off a conversation and let's say we're in a particular amount of self awareness in that conversation, and then all of a sudden something happens in that conversation and we shift in some way. And in the conversation, we have this feeling of either we feel expanded, like it's interesting, it's fun, you're liking the topic, um, you find what the other person's saying valuable or just relevant in some way, or we go in the other direction and a wall goes up for whatever reason. Like that conversation is like, oh, okay, something about this made me feel uncomfortable, made me feel upset. I feel angry all of a sudden. Like, it's just, and our walls come up.
Mm.
And so we have, there's an opportunity for both. And some of us is where we come into the conversation, like who we are when we come into that conversation. And I guess a lot of it is who are we as we come into the conversation.
That's an interesting inventory to take, isn't it?
Yeah, like, what state of mind am I in? How am I feeling? Um, and all that when all that comes with it, so in its entirety. So who am I when I come into this conversation? And am I truly focused? I mean, that's the other thing, obviously, right? Or am I distracted? So even if I, like, and that's part of who I am too, do I come in having do I come in with some pre-existing ideas, like, an objective or a quote unquote what I want to get out of the conversation or how I want this conversation to unfold.
Or maybe just want it to over so you can get on with your real life. I mean,
That's right, exactly, exactly.
that's 10 minutes of my life I'll never get back, that sort of thing.
That's right. And I think that, who are we when we come into any particular situation or conversation?
And I really like what you're saying from the perspective, and this for the folks at home. If you are listening to yourself listen, like being an observer at the same time that you're having an active participation, if you find yourself being escapist or very interested or whatever, you can either make a decision to continue, pursuing that, or maybe you just say something out loud like, I'm sorry, but I haven't really been listening to you, Jan. Could you say that again? I'm going to give you my attention now. There's always that possibility as opposed to trying to fake your way through it. And after it's all over, you've created no new relationship. You've created no new understanding. Matter of fact, it is minutes of your life you'll never get back.
Hmm. No, I really like that because I think a lot of times it's hard for those words to come out of our mouth. Like, oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't like for a moment my mind drifted, or I wasn't focused on what you were saying.
Yeah,
I think it's a little scary because we're like, oh, is the other person going to get upset? Like, what do you mean that you weren't listening to me?
right.
But
That's,
on the other hand, like, wouldn't you rather know that than not know that?
so, and it also points to, are you up for creating relationship value in your interactions with people? Or are you more interested in being that person who is going through the conversations as if where you're going is what's really happening, spending your time planning the next thing and all the rest of it? And I mean, that just brings to mind a very real thing that happened to me when I was likely in my 40s. maybe late 30s. And there was a conversation that somebody said that they had with me, and that after we were done with the conversation, they listened to what I had said, and they took it home and they thought about it for an hour, and they changed their whole life as a result of it. And to this day, I have no freaking idea what it was that I said. I wouldn't credit it that way, but that really just kind of woke me up for the moment and basically said, holy mackerel, what if we got out of bed and we interacted with other human beings? Like what they say really could change our lives, you know? What if that's possible?
I had similar experiences where like I would talk during a class, like during a yoga class. I had a student one day who came because I always share different experiences. I always open up a session with with what's on my mind usually, or what's I'm thinking about, what I'm and I remember her coming up to me and basically she applied to grad school because of something I said. And I remember thinking to myself, I have no idea what I said. Like, I don't know what I said that was so inspirational to her, but obviously I had said something. And one is if we went into a conversation knowing that, with that idea of what, like you said, what this person says to me could change my life, but also realizing that what we say to other people
Yeah.
has the possibility of changing somebody else's life.
If you live long enough, that's going to happen. Every human being is going to experience that moment simply because there are other people that regard you that way. They can't help but regard you that way. And
Hmm.
there are some that are doing it out of love. There are some that are doing it out of fear. There are some that are doing it out of distrust. But for whatever reason, they're listening to you as if their lives depend on it. You'll never know
Hmm.
unless you're listening the same way.
Hmm. True.
And then all of a sudden, there's like this magic moment where energy just gets exchanged back and forth at rapid fire. And suddenly you notice your chest is warm, you know, or your hands are tingly, or your forehead is, or something like that. Those visceral responses to what's going on in a conversation, um, to me, are a little bit like listening to music and getting goosebumps, you know? Or seeing somebody do something really, really well and go, wow. But we don't get a chance to say wow all that much, do we?
Mm-mm. No, no, we don't. I but I don't know, not even say it, but I wonder how much people actually feel wow on any given day. Like to, yeah, if you think about that experience of, for me, I'm a morning person. So when I get up and I see that spectacular sunrise, like the sun is coming up, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Or if you're an evening person, you see a sunset and you're like awestruck. It's like, wow. How many of us let moments like this pass us by? And then all of a sudden, hours go by and it's just the same old kind of stuff that happens. And not only in conversation, like, so I look at experiences like that, which train you to actually be open enough to actually notice when someone has said something to you very impactful.
Yeah.
Be, because otherwise we're asleep, basically. We're asleep in a conversation, or we're asleep in our lives and not really experiencing much, going through the motions, so to speak.
Yeah. We were talking about, different groups of people who experience a very high level of stress, or a very high level of anxiety, or regret, or grief, or all of those things that make them want to slather some kind of a jelly all over their body so that they can be insulated for a moment or two. I mean, sometimes that looks like, using alcohol or drugs or something else, or wasting your time, doing something online, that just numbs your mind. And the unfortunate part of that is that, we all do it. I mean, one way or another, every last one of us has that as a go-to mechanism to survive this moment while you're not really happy with how you're feeling. However, that's the best moment in the world to kind of step back and get a little curious about it. You know, if you still want to do those things that are complete time wasters after you've gone through an analysis and say, "Uh, do I care why this is coming up right now? Is this, my intention? Is this how I want to experience my life?" Especially if it's happening a lot. And I know that in the early days when I was starting my business, when I got to the point where I had more than a dozen employees, I had people coming in and they'd say, "Bill, I'm bored." I was that kind of a boss. They could come in at the end of my desk and they could say, "I'm bored. What have you got to challenge me?" It's like, wow, how have I been that I get that kind of response out of somebody? They're ready for a new challenge and they're expecting me to set the bar for them. And you know what I always did? I don't know. What do you think? What would be challenging for you? What would you like to do? If you could do anything at all, and you know what we're trying to do here, in terms of upgrading our customer service and quality and all that good stuff. And what would you do? I get some really pretty interesting things coming back. I mean, there was this one gal who basically said, "I want to visit our top 5 customers and I want to interview them. I want to ask them the following questions. What is it that you like about what we do for you?" And I'm paraphrasing this because this is, I mean, seriously, 25, 30 years ago. Um, and what was the most memorable part of the last service that we gave your company? And if you were going to describe our company to someone else, what would you say? What would be the top 3 words that you'd use as descriptors? This was an English major. And then the next one would be, what did we do that you weren't happy with? And then the last one was, what's the one thing we can do for you better that would make all the difference in our relationship? Along those lines, right? We'll get 3 things that you like about us and what you'd tell other people. And then 2, which would basically be, what can we learn from you? You're a big deal to us. We really appreciate your business and we want to know how we can get better for you. And that started because somebody came in and got curious about, how can I change my state from being bored to doing something that's more interesting? And so I probably have collapsed this down. There might have been a couple of conversations and some busy work in the middle, but that's what we ended up with a report. Came back and told everybody that met with this guy on this date. And while I was there, I met with 3 other people. And these are people we never work with or talk to, but what they heard about us from the other people. And without that curiosity, being part of the equation, none of that was possible. It couldn't happen. Who would
Hmm.
care? You know? Can you even imagine in the medical community or some place where we consider it to be very clinical, always arm's length? You and I are not in the arm's length business. We bring a lot of energy and we exchange it. But there are certain disciplines where they are real careful about it, not exchanging energy with the people who come in front of them. But what if they were interested? What if they were curious about it?
Well, it was interesting because as you're saying that, we had this conversation recently about, this kind of thing. But what if you went to a physician and they actually were truly listening to you? And I can say that yesterday I had the occasion to have the exact opposite. Like I left the office thinking to myself, This guy has no idea who I am. And let me tell you, taking what he told me and where he wants to go from here, I don't feel particularly comfortable. I'm like, I don't have much confidence in what he told me to do. I don't have, if it wasn't sort of, let's say, ruled by an entity that's not me solely, so I'm talking, if I wasn't having to worry about whether, this practitioner is a part of my health plan, my health insurance, or whatever, would I choose to continue this relationship? And that's what I think of a doctor patient is that's a relationship. I mean, it's the ultimate in relationship business kind of thing. But, it's that feeling of, I was like, I don't really, I don't really want to I don't want to continue this.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying because there are so many folks. I mean, they're good. I mean, they're the nice people and all the rest of that. However, they see themselves in the transaction business, not in the relationship business. And I kind of feel it's just the opposite. I don't care what you do. And I took some of my best coaching from people that I was smart enough to hire, to come work with me. But there was a guy who I hired, and I really didn't know much about him. I knew he was a veteran and he had come back, and he obviously had a lot of talent, and his skill set, I think, was in machine tool and die making, right? And he needed a job. This was in the mid 1980s. He said, "I'll do anything," and he did. He just became a guy Friday that anything I needed done, he emptied trash, and he'd come by and he always said something to bust me up. He'd come over, he'd look at my trash can. He goes, "Oh, Bill made a lot of mistakes today." I still get warm inside thinking about it, but he looked over to see if there was a reaction. And I said, "You son of a, you busted me right up." I said, "Do you do this with everybody?" He said, "I'll do it with everybody that'll play. Some won't." But that was, you know, kind of a unique thing for me when, I mean, I worked for somebody else who ultimately signed my paycheck at that point. So I got to be, kind of who I wanted to be. But when I went to work for myself, I tried to really take it to another level in terms of really challenging the notion of, are other people doing it correctly? Are they creating a work environment that nurtures people and gives them an opportunity to kind of integrate themselves, not like the person at home and the person at church and the person with the kids, baseball games, and the person with the PTO and the all that, where they're disintegrated and they got all these different ways of being. What if we just have people that are great people that we're continuously encouraging to do what they can, and continuously, look for places in themselves that they want to upgrade and allow them to do that so that they show up everywhere they are. They don't have to do the different role models and all the role playing. They just show up and be effective.
Yeah, well, the word that comes to mind is they show up and they're authentic,
Yes.
and then they're, you know, in that authenticity, they're effective. But it's really around being authentic and being in an environment where you feel comfortable that you can be authentically you.
Yeah. The
And there
background of trust is really important.
and there's not really, I mean, there are a lot of places in people's lives where they don't really have, like, they don't feel like they can be themselves.
Right.
They have particular images they're trying to portray or particular roles they're trying to play, and they don't really have the opportunity, or they feel they're not, they don't feel like they're allowed to be authentic.
And that's an interesting thing. Um, and the reason that it's interesting to me is that there was kind of a shift, I think, between the 70s and the 80s. The 70s was how to speak so that other people would listen to you, like how to be a really slick salesman huckster, that no matter what you said, you'd always have an answer for any consideration that they had, and always be regarded as smart. And once you learn those skills, being genuine was really hard to access. How, especially if those skills got you moved up. And I'll speak for me personally. When those skills got me moved up in the organization into responsibilities where I really felt like I had to consistently play a role, and that role had to be the same for everybody. The I went to a training seminar for a weekend, and they were talking about public authenticity. I thought to myself, I have no freaking idea. I don't even know what that means. I mean, I'm not, you know, I was just so disconnected from having the thoughts inside of me empower my outward behaviors in a true and honest way. So the access to being genuine and authentic was never to tell somebody to be genuine and authentic, because you just can't do that. It's not something you do. It's a way to be, right? It's just how you are. But there are practices that you can put in place, and one of them, the guy that really moved me along through manufacturing always said, "Tell it like it is. Just tell it like it is. No need to sugarcoat anything, no matter who you're working with." He said, "Be consistent and tell it like it is." Cool. I mean, I can do that, right? But now I got a new way of not being authentic.
I mean, what it just brings to me this feeling of like whether you're acting from your head or listening to your head versus listening to your heart. That's authenticity. Is when we come from a place where, and you're talking to somebody who's, I'm very analytical and very kind of in my brain, that sciency kind of brain. But I'll be the first one to even say to myself, like, where's this coming from? Like, what part of me is this? My thinking mind, which so much of the time is wrong. Like, and what is this? Where is this coming from? Because I think if we really want people to feel like they can be authentic,
Yeah,
and we want to be authentic, it's not coming from our heads. Eh, it's coming from a deeper part. Eh,
I agree with you. I always refer to human beings as having three components, and there's the head, the heart, and the spirit or the gut. And when all three of those are pointing in the same direction, and you're acting, in concert with all three of those, then yeah, you're basically telling it like it is and being who you are. But when you're uncomfortable, one of those is out. That's a good indicator that there's something rotten in Dodge. Might be a good time to pay attention to what's actually happening. Maybe you'll learn something. That's my
mhm.
advice for me.
Yeah, I mean, I I think you're right, because I think that then something is not in alignment, um, somewhere, right within.
Yeah.
It doesn't resonate with you. It, that feeling of falseness. or not doing something, compartmentalization. This whole idea of compartmentalizing. It's like, you know, so it's really about integration, like the integration. And I think of much more, or I feel much more about bringing the heart into it. It's just, which isn't a place that I think we're taught to like, especially in our society. It's like shouldn't you shouldn't divulge too much about how you feel. You know,
Yeah, I mean, if you stop and think about it, the messages have been very clear for a long time. Never let them see you sweat. The Don Corleone, never let anyone outside the family know what you're thinking. Okay. Now, the rest of our culture has had that in other words, but it's always been there. Better to be silent and thought a fool than to speak up and remove all doubt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these are really not like, go on, take a chance, who cares if you look like a dodo, you'll get over it. Try it. You'll like it. No, we don't do that.
oh, sorry. Tonka was making a funny sound. I got distracted for a moment.
That
No,
wasn't a look. I interpreted it correctly.
yeah, I was like, "What are you doing over there?" So yeah, I mean, and I was talking earlier with someone, and I was saying that I remember going into a situation where I really kind of was vulnerable, and then it's the whole idea afterwards of like, "Oh my gosh, maybe I shouldn't have said that or opened up like that,"
Right.
and that feeling of like, "Oh no," like, and also very dependent on let's say where you live and what part of the world, what part of the, if you're here in the States, what part of the United States you're from,
Yep.
and what's kind of quote unquote acceptable and what's not.
Yeah, there's a riskiness in terms of, especially when you're not, well trained or inexperienced in terms of taking chances with people in relationship situations. And just having a conversation for some people is like, it's traumatic. I remember a guy that started working for us. I think he was 21 years old when he started. He'd been on online and was a help desk guy, in a um, internet company where people had dial up, and if they had problems, they would call in, and he'd have things that he could say to them. But when we sat down the first time at a staff meeting, and I asked him to tell us a little bit about himself, tripped all over his words, got all screwed up. He started crying. It's like, "What's up, Chris?" He said, "Bill," he said, "I don't know how to talk to a group of five people." It's like, "Okay, don't worry about it. Why don't you gather yourself? We'll just move on." Everybody just kind of went over and gave him a big hug and then sat down again. So from that humble beginning at just a regular staff meeting of what's going on, who are you? About 4 years later, I had him training uh, teachers when we did an installation of a new library, all the IT stuff, down at Pine Point School. He put together all of the training materials. He led all the training classes for all the instructors for them to turn around and train their students. And we did the same thing when we did a rollout of documenting some software that was written for one of our local addiction services providers, right? And he comes over to me after one of the sessions. He says, "You remember when I first came to PDS?" I said, "Yeah, I do, Chris." I said, "You have blossomed. You are definitely, you've gone through the molting, and you are now an eagle. You are no longer an eaglet."
I mean, and I just think that there are situations where we feel, where we might be able to be in a conversation with someone in a particular situation like that. Like he was used to being one on one, and then stepping up in front of more people all of a sudden is a whole new kind of like a whole new scenario, a whole new can of worms, kind of thing, ready to. And then realizing that, whether that is a business setting versus a social setting, like what the difference is
Yeah.
and how you feel. Like I'm really great in classroom settings because I know what I'm going to talk about. I have a conversation, whatever. And then all of a sudden I would get in more social circles and I was like, I don't know how this conversation's going to go. And it would be very anxiety causing.
Yep.
When I was talking to one of my family members and who's a teacher, and he was saying the same thing. Like, and besides for teaching, very, very introverted and very much a homebody. So just kind of interesting in that kind of more social realm, what that brought up. And it just the difference, like, everybody's kind of different. And certain people are in certain situations and feel really at ease, and other people are like, not for me.
Yeah, and I'll kind of refer back to what you said earlier. Part of what happens is you're listening to the voice in your head, about, how am I looking, and am I making any sense? Do I look stupid? All that kind of stuff that happens. And then you're getting rapid fire, all these questions, and it's like, will you please shut up? Will you shut? Thing you're broken down, and you get stage fright, or the situation just becomes something where you say, I could never do that again. And unfortunately, that's not how life works, by the way. That's actually your best coaching for what you should really put some time into. You
Mhm,
have certain circumstances where you have a loss of power, and you have a breakdown in terms of what your intention was and what really happens. That means, there's a skill you can acquire, and it might be worth your while. But every once in a while, when you get to the point where you're just in that zone, and all of a sudden you're like funny, and then all of a sudden you're like loose, and now you're just looking for what do they want next, and you're giving them what they're asking you for non-verbally. It just works and it flows, and it's like freaking magic.
mhm, mhm. I always say that when I teach a class, a yoga class, I get in that space quite easily. I mean, I'm actually funny, and everything, and it's always so. I remember when I first observed it, like I first noticed it, and I was like, "Wow, this is like," with that curiosity, it was kind of like, "Oh, when I do that, look at where I go, or what comes out. Look at basically who I become because, not necessarily in that place all the time. And what allows you to be more comfortable in situations. Like I remember when I first started doing videos and I would record, especially if I wasn't having a conversation, like just speaking into the camera or whatever. And I hated it. And so I would actually have like it was almost like a Mr. Ed, where I would like have Tonka there and I would talk to him instead, and everything. And because, animals brought out a side of me which was much more relaxed, much more laid back, was actually kind of funny, and it was just so funny that I would just sit there and people were like, oh my gosh, you're hysterical when, he joined you. And it was so interesting that, I just that the difference for me of looking at it and saying, oh my gosh, like it's so different, as opposed to speaking to like dead air where you have no idea who's listening, where you have no, like, there's no feedback from anybody because you're just speaking to a camera, which from what I've said, like I have a friend who did TV and said that was very hard. Like, just speaking into a camera and, not having, not having an audience to play off of, whether that audience is one person or that audience is a lot of people.
Yeah, there's something wonderful about that. And if you stop and think about it, that's what we do every week. We hop on here and then we listen to the people who are going to be listening to us. You know what I mean? And I don't know about you, but I actually have this sense of wanting to provide something for our listeners who I don't know who they're going to be, but I know they're out there. And I listen for what kind of questions and what they might be interested in hearing us chat about.
Mhm, mhm,
I think it's not an accident that today of all days we're talking about being genuine, about listening, about authenticity, and all the rest of that.
mhm.
There's a lot going on in the world that would make that sound like a bad idea, you know? However, there's two ways you can live your life, right? The safe, unexpressed way where you're stifled and you never know what it feels like to be a real human being. And how you know that's going on is that you've had the opportunity to feel like a real human being more than once in your life, and it's missing now. Or you can go through life just noticing things are fun, you know? And holy mackerel, it was a lot of fun hanging out with Jan today. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. But I think that if you can, when you're saying that fun, but I think about if you can live in that kind of wow moment more often. I remember once flying with my nephew. So he was about 10 years old and he had never been on a plane. So I remember flying with him and sitting next to him and the questions he asked me, were like about things which I didn't even notice. It was like that real child mind of like, of wow, of living in that place of like, wow,
Yep.
like, and just I remember it to this day. It was obviously it was a long time ago, but I remember the questions he asked and how excited he was. And it was just like everything that happened on this plane was just like this, oh my gosh, kind of thing. And how can we live in a place like that just in our normal lives? Like, how much do we not notice because, we're around it every day? The people that we meet, could we look at that experience, especially now, like when I got on Zoom this morning for a wonderful meeting I'm on Wednesdays. And, so it's run by a friend of mine in North Carolina. And on it, you know, there's somebody who gets on from Italy and India and England, from the UK, from South Africa, from Spain. And I'm sitting there going like, wow, this is pretty amazing to sit there and be in the presence of all these different people from all over the world. And then to realize like you're friends with them. Like, yeah, I met someone on Monday. I met up with guy I've been on Zoom with every week for about almost every week for probably about 2 years, who lives in upstate New York, who I've never met. And we met in person. It was kind of like we were fast buddies. We're really, really good friends, but yeah, we've never been in, till the other day, we were never in the same room with each other.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm kind of left with the notion of, at the end of your days, on your last moment, it's not about how many breaths you take, but how many times and how many moments your breath was taken away.
Hmm.
And that's actually not a bad way to measure whether or not you're living a life worth having, you know? And the degree that your breath is taken away might be something as simple as being around a 3, 4, or 5-year old, just being amazed, at their perception, at their questions, of the things that they just want to know more about.
Mhm.
And I think I kind of miss that because I got a lot out of that when my kids were small. And I got a lot out of it, maybe even more so when my grandchildren were small, because when they were here, I was with them all the time. And that was a luxury I wasn't afforded with my children. That between school and this and that, it would come down to spending quality time with them here and there, but not like the one-on-one time with grandchildren. And the wonder, in both of them as they walk through our big old house, and the 3-year-old at the time says says, "Grandpa, can you show me your house?" 3-year-old. So we went outside, and and I pointed up to the house. He says, "Grandpa, I really love your house." And I said, "That's great, Lincoln." And he said, "So, Grandpa, whose house is that?" He's pointing at the barn. And I said, "Lincoln, that's my house too." And he says, "Grandpa, really?" And I said, "Yeah, Lincoln." And he said, "Grandpa, I love both of your houses." He looks down the hill a little bit further. We've got an outside garage that was put there in the early 1900s. We don't use it for a garage, but he points over there and he says, "Grandpa, whose house is that?" And I said, "Lincoln, that's my house too." He said, "Grandpa, I love all your houses." He wormed his way into my heart that day. It was just so much wonder and wow and awe, and golly, I still get those, responses out of the boys, but probably not to the degree or with the ease that it seemed to be to get it from them then, because now they're closer to adulthood, with the older one who's going to be a teenager. He's going to be 13 in July, which that's like crazy to me. We waited forever for him to be born, and it was like a miracle child, because my daughter was, I think, 32 years old when when he was born. And kind of like we waited until we were 25 to have our first. Well, she and Ty waited a whole 10 years to have their first, and then when they did, he was a miracle baby, no doubt
Mm.
about it.
Yeah, but there is that way that kids look at things and see things, and the way that, their processing of a situation
Yeah,
and what they bring to it. I mean, I love spending time with my nieces and nephews, and at points where, one of my nieces is um doesn't really they don't have any electronics in the house, so they don't have so they're still into that, they're into games, and they're into puzzles, and creating, and imagination is really big. And so just being around them,
right.
and the innovation, uh, and the excitement again. And then when I'm around them, they don't have any animals, and they always ask me 1,000 questions about animals in general, about animals, and like my nephew will get I'm staying over with, and my brothers, and they're there, and they get up in the morning, and my nephew says to me, and he's like 5 years old, and he says to me, "Aunt Jan, can we talk about animals again?" I'll be like, "Oh god," just like, "Okay, that's a language I definitely speak." And so, being able to also feel like you're opening up their world a little bit, maybe to things that they don't know, and experiences they don't know. And then when you talk about having an impact, like who knows what they end up doing at the end of as they get older, and how they are with their kids, maybe, or just what they do for work. And it's all those seeds that we plant for other people that allow them to, you know, start to create themselves.
Yeah, what I wonder I wonder what kids today, what their experience of growing up is like. I wonder if it's more like ours than we think or less like ours than we think, you know? If you stop and think about all the music and the songs, like the Moody Blues, to our children's, whatever, and through the eyes of a child, and teach your children well, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, just goes on and on and on. And now, what is the role of what is the kid's role in terms of their place in the family, in terms of their actually being a teacher, because my kids were teachers. I mean, I didn't get any advanced training on how to be a dad, or a parent or any of that kind of stuff. It was on the job training all the time. Many firsts, if you know what I mean.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know in some ways, I worry a lot, or I think a lot, I shouldn't say. I think a lot about kids now, and a few things that I feel like we were gifted with. One is boredom, because I don't think boredom is bad. I think it's good to be bored every now and then, and to have to either you get really creative or you go into your imagination, but this whole idea of time having to be filled with whatever, with stuff, you know.
Yeah, sometimes it's don't do something, stand there, you know?
Well, I was talking to somebody about, kids and school and everything. And maybe parents might feel differently, but I actually think that kids are inside and in a classroom sitting down too long. I don't think kids are meant to sit that long. I really
Yeah.
don't. I think there is this whole idea of being creative and exploratory and everything. I feel like needs to be cultivated a little more.
I kind of agree with you. And again, this has to do with my age and my distance from how schools operate today, because we don't have anybody in our general family right now. And most of the kids that are in our family are now in middle school or going to high school. So that what it ends up being is we see a lot of posts on Facebook about what they're doing in sports or different, recognition awards that they're getting and that sort of thing. But I don't have any idea what it's like to be a kid these days.
Mhm.
And I'm kind of wondering about that. And how do they walk around, in what's the space between their ears like? Are they constantly worried? Are they thinking about things? Are they able to just focus on what's in front of them and be a kid? You know?
Well, somebody was commenting to me the other day about the fact that they feel like kids are exposed to so much information
Yeah.
all the time, whether that be, you know, through TV, internet, social media, that they are getting so much information about so many topics at all, you know, some of which, or maybe much of which, they're not at that point ready to handle.
Yeah, they don't get a chance to edit or say no, or it's just coming at them full blast, isn't it?
Hmm. And that is concerning. And I think that might be part of the reason that, I look at things like suicide and addiction and things like that. I just think it's overwhelming.
Yeah, and that is something that's near and dear to me. It's one of my main missions in life right at the moment, to try to make a difference with that, for kids of all ages. You- I stop and think about first responders and veterans, and then also, kids who are prone to homelessness, they're prone to addiction, they're prone to suicide, and that's just not okay. That's not all right with me.
Mhm.
And so, I can be a big mouth, and I am doing that, and I'm working at getting some things started and trying to get the silos to connect with each other so that we can get a lot more out of our scarce resources to help a lot more people. And hopefully I'll have some effectiveness and have some good things happen there.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely.
So I have one more question for you before we say goodbye, so we can
Mhm.
lighten things up a little bit. There was a meme on Facebook. I love them because they make me think. I don't have an answer to the memes. I like it when I can sit there and play with the question. So what if you could go back to the 1970s? No cell phones, no computers, none of this electronic nonsense. You just go back to the 1970s and whatever that was. And the question is would you do it?
Mm. I have a mixed feeling because I love the wisdom I've gained through the years. And whenever I've thought, I mean, I think of my age that I was then, and know the age that I was, would probably say no. Knowing that I was like, pretty much a teen, and I didn't love being a teen. So if you would ask me if I wanted to go back to the 60s, I might have said absolutely.
There you go. All right. So that's a valid you can make that be whatever you want it to be. And that's funny because I I thought different things than I do now. That's for sure. I,
Mhm.
I had a lot more questions that didn't get expressed as questions. They were just upset, like the fear and anxiety and stress and all those sort of things. I felt that a lot in high school, you know. And if I were really thinking in terms of the immediacy and the we can find you anywhere on the planet because of that little 8-ounce thing that you carry around in your pocket. I just remember, well, I'll get back to you by Friday. Our world doesn't work that way anymore. You say,
No, it
"I'll get back
doesn't.
to you by Friday." They go, okay, your replacement will do it faster than that.
Right, exactly.
Kind of the implication. So one more thing, and then I'll ask you to kind of wrap. But I'm interested. What's the big thing for 2024 for you, Jan?
Um, hmm. I've been on this. Okay, I think the big thing for me is, well, I was speaking of myself when I said that I'm really good at I'm really good at teaching, but I'm not that comfortable in more social kind of situations. And I've been on this kind of path for the last few months of really taking a moment to feel, to do things I love or to do things that are not work is one. And also to almost place myself intentionally in those types of situations because, it's the only way you change. Or you figure out what's really going on. Yeah. So,
Yeah, you have a curious mind, and I think you're having fun turning it back up a notch, aren't you?
I am. I am.
Excellent. So any thoughts to kind of wrap up with here for all of our friends at home?
I guess it would be to challenge yourself in some way, like kind of test the waters in a situation. Maybe do something that feels uncomfortable. Yeah, push the envelope a little bit.
Yeah. You're only going this way one time. And most everything that you do, if you're smart about what you do, you can try something else tomorrow, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Any final thoughts on what we talked about today?
No, I always loved with our conversation. I really think that there's such great value in take a moment to listen and just be open.
I like it. So, folks, I'm going to leave you with the same homework that I do every podcast. And that is call somebody, send them an email, carrier pigeon, I don't care, a truckload of flowers, and put a note in it that basically says, I love that you exist. My life works because you're here. And if you ever need me, I will be here for you. With that in mind, everyone have a great week and enjoy yourself. We are lighting the candle, a world that works. And Jan, thank you so much for your partnership.
Oh, thank you, Bill. Great to be here with you.
Bye-bye for now, y'all.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode as well as the rest of the network at exvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.